official podcast of the Jacksonville Public Library.
I'm Hurley.
And I'm Jenna.
Today we have Dr. Tim Gilmore on our show, and he is a professor of English at FSCJ, Florida State College at Jacksonville, and he also is an auteur.
And a personal friend of Hurley.
Yeah, he's a good friend of mine.
Aww.
I've known about Tim's work since I was probably 17, maybe. I grew up in Jacksonville, and I was really interested in learning more about the different abandoned buildings around town because I went to school sort of near downtown, and I always passed by public school number 4.
Oh, it's creepy.
Which is kind of a legend. Do you know about this building?
Yeah, well, okay. I've passed it before on
I-10, the
right?
flyover.
Yes,
Yeah, that's the school you see down on the right from the flyover when you go over. Yeah.
And I feel like I asked a couple people about it because I was like, what is this?
What did they tell
you?
you?
Why is it still there? I don't know. They just said it was an abandoned school and that it was like people think it's haunted and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah. People think it's way haunted. The rumor has it. There was a fire in the school, I believe, but the rumor has it that there was a fire in the boiler room and all the children in the school died.
What?
But it's not true. So people think that these school children are haunting this school. But it's sort of a rite of passage, you know, if you grow up in Jacksonville and you know about the school, you kind of sneak in with your friends.
Are you serious?
Yeah,
have you been
people
there?
Have done it. I'm not going to comment on that. But I work for the city. I can't share that information.
Oh my gosh, I cannot imagine.
So it's a creepy old school, and the roof has kind of dropped in, and I was dying to know more about it, and all my friends were like, let's go in, but I was like a young inquisitive lady and also scared. So I did what any millennial would have done. I Googled it, and Tim's blog came up. His blog, Jax Psycho Geo, and he was talking about going inside of School 4, and he had all these pictures and stuff, which we couldn't find anywhere else. So
that's awesome.
It was really cool to actually see the inside of the school. So I started reading his blog, and it was like the first, I think, creative nonfiction I ever really read. I had only read like nonfiction, like history books and stuff, but I loved that he sort of talked about the history of the building, but he also talked about the actual like exploration and the research process and learning more about the buildings. So then I ended up meeting Tim in college, and we hit it off, and he's great. He does such an enormous service for our city, not only by documenting its history, but also just by exploring it and encouraging others to do the same.
Yeah, and all these first-person accounts that he adds to it is just like a great archive for us to have for years to come.
Yeah, it really is.
No one else is doing.
It's like layered history. It's really cool. And one thing I love that he said when we talked, he said he loves feeling the past in the present. And I think that's exactly what you feel when you read Jax Psycho Geo or any of his books. And he's written tons of books. He's written 17 books and counting.
Gosh.
Yeah, and he talks to us about a novella he's working on too. So there's number 18.
Wow. Busy guy.
Yeah. He writes like it's some kind of disease. Yeah. Like he just can't do anything about it. He just has to keep writing. And I mean that as the sincerest compliment ever. Like his work ethic is just intense. And I love that he's here in Jacksonville talking about Jacksonville.
Absolutely.
So here's Tim Gilmore. Tim, thank you so much for coming on our show today.
Thank you for having me on, Hurley.
Absolutely. So first of all, you've been writing about Jacksonville and in Jacksonville for a very long time. What is it about Jacksonville that makes you want to start writing?
In the first place, honestly, I'm here. So, and of course, I have no idea what it would be like to have grown up somewhere else because, you know, you are from where you're from. I'm from here. And I assumed that if I grew up in Tulsa or, you know, Seattle or Paris, that, you know, I would be doing something similar. But this is where I am, and I like to explore place. If I go out of town somewhere, I mean, you know, one of the first things that I want to do is just walk for 10 or 15 miles.
And what are you looking for when you do that?
Here or when I'm
anywhere.
Out of town somewhere?
What is it about a place that makes you just want to get out and explore?
When I go somewhere else, it's I like to kind of get lost, you know. I like to, you know, to get lost in some place that I've not been before and experience it fully. I mean, you know, place is where we are set, and so I think we inhabit it, and I want to kind of experience what people have left in the places they've been,
Yeah, definitely.
So I love that feeling if you're in a big city, I love that feeling. And if it's, London or San Francisco or wherever, of just the fullness of human experience in that place, not just in the moment, but, from history for however much time has gone by. And so I'm always looking for that here too, but it's a little harder when you know the place
for
really
sure.
well.
And as you said, you are here and you're from here.
Yes.
What's your earliest memory exploring Jacksonville?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think it probably goes back to when I was a little kid. My dad worked at the railroad, and we had one car. We had this beat up old Plymouth something or other. It was this giant boat of a car. And my mom stayed at home. And so every day we would take my dad to work, and then we would pick him up. And there was some kind of, I can picture it in my head what exactly the space was. I'm not sure, because I assume it was safe for me to be wandering around, a railroad. But, I would find all these old rusted railroad spikes and take them home, and I loved it there. I loved doing that.
What was it about it that really captivated you?
Well, I don't know. I was a little kid, it just seemed like a strange place. But, I also, when I was pretty young, got kind of an understanding of what archaeology was. And I think I thought that I was doing some sort of archaeology, finding these old rusty things there, which maybe, I guess I was in a way.
You were.
I'm sure your imagination too was kind of fueling that. That's kind of how I was as a kid, like going somewhere and kind of imagining what it was. And like, you could create like this whole little universe in this,
Sure.
we had woods behind our house, and we would create like, oh, this is the kitchen, or, just
Sure.
little interesting places where the trees had kind of fallen and it made some little house. That was the best part, is just kind of imagining what it was and creating something new.
And I think that's really interesting too, that, that's one of the first things little kids do, is they create place, so you go out into the woods and the trees just happen to be growing in, whatever proximity to each other. And so you automatically start seeing that as, rooms in a house or something like that. So it's pretty innate to us, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and you've sustained your interest in place building and placemaking in your blog, Jax Psycho Geo, which has been going for 6.5 years now. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
It's incredible. You've written over nearly 500 unique stories that all take place in Jacksonville. Oh, you're going to hit 500, and it's going to be super exciting.
I hadn't thought about that. What do you think I should do when I hit 500?
I don't know. Let's talk about this.
Yeah?
Well, what is the 500th story going to be? I guess you don't know yet. Yeah.
I don't know exactly how many there are.
Right.
I know I'm on the way, but
very close.
I have no idea.
That'll be interesting. So what keeps you interested in exploring our city this way, psychogeographically, if you could define that for us too?
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, what in the world is psychogeography? And, there have been so many times I thought I should have named the site something different, because people always, understandably, get the name mixed up. So many people have called it JaxPsycho.com. I'm like, not, Jax Psycho, that's weird. But psychogeography, so really it's kind of a clumsy portmanteau word of psychology and geography. It's a psychology of place. So a number of writers and artists have identified with the term, and loosely it means any kind of art or writing that tries to explore the psychology, or even you could say the spirit of the place. So that's what I wanted to do here. And I've had people ask me, aren't you going to run out of places? You constantly, it almost feels like it's infinite, Jacksonville's a small city, and terms of world history, it hasn't been here very long, but people's stories just go on and on and on. And I feel like I could, I don't know that I would want to, I'm sure I would wear myself out at some point, but I feel like I could, I could do this for 500 years and keep finding strange stories that I had never known anything about.
Definitely. And you mentioned this idea of exploring the spirit of a place. What is the spirit of Jacksonville, if you had to describe it? After writing almost 500 stories about it, what is it?
I don't know that that's answerable in a neat little capsule.
Of course.
But Jacksonville is a strange town. It really is. When I was growing up, I don't think I realized how strange it was. And when I was a teenager, all of the kids that I knew were like, we got to get out of Jacksonville. Nothing happens here. This is a boring town. And
did you feel that way growing up yourself?
As a teenager, I did.
Yeah.
Although looking back, I mean, I sometimes I don't know what I was thinking. There were some pretty cool things that we were getting into, and some interesting places that we didn't maybe weren't fair to in thinking that way.
I think it's natural to say,
Yeah.
what lies beyond
certain
here,
extent.
like the mystery
Sure.
of elsewhere is
Every
always kind of
teenager says
looming.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. But
You just
then
want to
when-
get away from your parents, not
yeah,
necessarily
for
the
sure.
town.
You want freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Well, a lot of Jacksonville's stories historically, and therefore I think the spirit of the place, have had to do with certain forms of religion and with race. And, there's a lot in Jacksonville's past that we still wrestle with in the present that's not very pretty, And so, I mean, it is a southern town, and it's a southern town in a way that no other Florida city is, And yet, I mean, it's also, you could look at it the other way too. It's the most, the most Florida of what you usually think of as southern towns, There's definitely an element of Southern Gothic here, and I'm pretty sure you can find Florida Man on lots of our street corners too.
Oh, yes.
The infamous Florida Man.
Yep.
What are some of your favorite stories from this website you've been keeping up for so long?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. It's really it's hard to answer, And I was thinking about this actually earlier and thinking. And I'm going to answer the question, but I always feel like I could say like I can't really speak for it anymore. It's like it's taken on its own life, and what I love to hear is that people jump into it and didn't really expect to, but went from story to story to story and kind of went down the rabbit hole.
Right. The same way you can get lost in Jacksonville, you can get lost online in this website.
And I would love for people to, kind of to wander the city with the website. Some of the stories that I've done recently that I think are really interesting. I did a story. It's happened in Jacksonville Beach in the late 1970s. This was the stepdaughter of Lex Hester, who was a mayoral aide to Hans Tanzler and several other mayors, and was also really probably the main architect of Jacksonville Duval County consolidation. Right, so that's who Lex Hester was. His stepdaughter and two friends of hers who were brother and sister broke into her grandmother's house and murdered her in late 1976, and said that they killed her because she was the devil. The two friends that she was with were Billy and Renee Magnuson, whom she had met in Savannah, and they had had some kind of weird religious experience. That's kind of I think I got some answers to it, but there was clearly also some mental illness going on. Billy Magnuson told the police that he was God, and he said that Lex Hester was the Antichrist, and that the end of the world was going to be what year were you guys born? Never mind. The end of the world was going to be 1982, and he was going to fight the Antichrist in 1982.
Wow.
And so, really, that's a story of, two of those people were diagnosed with schizophrenia, so that's a story. In some ways it could have happened anywhere, but it's I find it interesting that it has a certain kind of religious overtones that it does. And the 1970s was a time when people, there were all these urban legends about devil worship, and sociologists have actually referred to this time period as the Satanic Panic, because even like in the mid 80s, people like Oprah Winfrey would have this as a subject on her daytime TV show.
Wow.
So, and this is a time period when and I grew up in a really Southern Baptist household when I was a kid, which is full of lots of its own strange stories, including the fact that when I was a kid, people saw the devil everywhere. I went to a church school when I was a kid, and they would, play Led Zeppelin songs backwards and tell you, what satanic messages were there. And of course, you could hear anything you wanted to hear, but that's a hell of a thing to be exposed to and kind of indoctrinated with when you're a little kid, But that's also a big part of the spirit of this place. I also recently did a story, and I love digging up stories that nobody else has written about. People think that everything's been done, maybe, but things have been done and forgotten. And so I did a story on a place called Springfield Hospital. It was not actually in Springfield; it was north of Springfield. But this was actually an abortion clinic 20 years before Roe v. Wade. So without getting into politics at all, if you want to know the kinds of things that happened, before Roe v. Wade, you can look at the story of Springfield Hospital. Women died there. Wow. And and the building is still there. It doesn't look like it used to. It's now the office for a portable toilet company. So, yeah. But there are also, another thing that happened at this hospital was the doctor who ran it would deliver babies for women who could not afford it, and this was, healthcare costs were even, or coverage was even more limited then, and he would, adopt them out, and he would make a profit on adopting babies out. So his name was Alva Weathers, and this was around early 1950s, late 1940s. And there are people to this day who are now, they're getting on up there, they're in their 70s, who refer to themselves as Weathers babies. They've got their birth certificate that says they were born at Springfield Hospital. It's got Alva Weathers' name on it. And they're in their 70s, but they're trying to find out who their biological mother was. And there are online forums about this, and people around the United States and the United Kingdom. And to think that all of this, I almost picture it kind of like a storm, and the epicenter is this place on East 27th Street, Springfield Hospital. And
that's so wild.
And it's so it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating.
You have Jax Psycho Geo broken up by sides of town, so
True,
you can
right.
really jump around the city on the top bar of the website. Do you have a favorite area of town to explore?
Oh wow, a favorite part of town to explore. I don't think I do. I love downtown. I love old places. I love feeling the past in the present. But all parts of town have their own interesting things to bring to the overall story, I guess.
It seems like a lot of research goes into this. And I know I see you here at the main library using the microfilm machine a lot. So what kind of resources do you use to do these stories and to find them?
Yeah, it is a lot of research. I mean, some stories more than others, In fact, I was recently kind of breaking down by time how long some stories do, and I was like, oh, I shouldn't have done that because I'm not getting, nobody's paying me to do this. I'm like, well, that story probably took me about 30 hours, So yeah, I do. I come to the fourth floor of the main library all the time. I'm frequently digging through the old Florida Times Union and Jacksonville Journal stories on microfilm. I like to track what different places were at different times, so I'll dig through the city directories and find out, so Edge City in 5 Points, which is, was like the first kind of hip, clothing store,
like a boutique. Yeah,
exactly. If you dig far enough back, there was actually, and this is really weird, and you have to picture it completely differently from how you would picture it now, but there was a bowling alley there at one point.
Really?
Yeah.
No way.
Right. And there was that like outdoor bowling. I can't exactly,
what?
I never saw any
Whoa.
photos, but
like candlepin bowling or something?
Yeah, I don't know exactly how it could have worked. It doesn't
right, because
seem like
that store is so tiny.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So let's see, what else? I mean, there are, you guys have some great old books in the reference section that sometimes, have to come from behind the desk. That's exciting. It feels like you have some kind of secret clearance or something. But the fourth floor is a place I frequently find myself.
Mm-hmm. We're very glad. We're very glad to hear that. That's great. So as a writer, like Jenna said, your research process is really hands-on, and you get a lot of accounts from other people. How do you find your subjects to talk to about these places in Jacksonville?
Yeah, different ways. Sometimes it's as simple as, there are buildings we all pass in our cars all the time and wonder about. And sometimes, I find myself wondering, why did I wait so many years to do this? For example, the old fire tower, the drill tower on the side of Interstate 10 in North Riverside. I got in touch with incredibly nice guy who works for the union there, and he walked me up and talked to me. It's super accessible, and I had to wonder, why did I wait so long to do that? And there are photos of how firefighters in training used to like rappel out the windows of that thing and like climb down on hooked ladders. And,
whoa.
Yeah. But then, the other thing is that I think of this metaphor a lot when I'm thinking about this. When you dig up a story, it's kind of like you're digging something out of the ground and its roots are tangled in the roots of all these other stories. So you dig up a story and you break off these pieces of all these other stories, that thing you're interested in, So, and that becomes its own kind of thing pulling me forward.
So the same effect that readers have going down a rabbit hole in your website, you've also experienced with these stories just in writing them, it sounds like.
I never thought of it that way, Hurley. Yeah, that's exactly right.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So new stories open up newer stories. That's really cool.
Do.
Wow,
yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That's so organic. I love it. So you're working on a novella right now, correct? And it's about a mass shooting that occurred in Bay Meadows in 1990, which is not a story I know anything about. So could you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So this was until the Pulse nightclub shooting. This was the worst mass shooting in Florida. And so this was 1990, so it was early in terms of mass shootings. I mean, there had been some, but it wasn't this kind of like constant phenomenon that it is now. And so GMAC, General Motors Acceptance Corporation, they ran an auto loan office there, and so in Bay Meadows. So James Edward Pugh had his car repossessed, and a couple months later went in with a couple of semi-automatic weapons and shot a lot of people, killed several people, and then shot himself. So the narrative that people told was, so this guy got his car repossessed and got mad and went in and shot a bunch of people, and that's true, but it's also a little simplistic. Not that there's ever any, obviously, justification for something like that, but he had so many things that had gone wrong in his life all at one time, and he was very quiet, and he was just like this real hard worker, and nobody really suspected anything, although he did show some pretty erratic behaviors right before he did this. But I had always, so I don't have a lot of memory of it when it happened. I was a teenager, and I have a little bit of memory, but I couldn't have told you exactly what had happened. But after the Parkland shooting, it kept gnawing at me that something happened here. What was it? And so many of us, every one of these shootings that happens, it's just like, why is this? This is just, why are we not doing anything about this? This is ridiculous that we just let this continue to happen. And if you look at statistics, the United States and other wealthy countries, this does not happen this way in other wealthy countries. You are as likely to die from a gunshot in Japan as you are from being struck by lightning in the United States. It's just it's not that it never happens, but it is a really, really rare phenomenon. Right. Not just mass shootings, but gun deaths, period. So I wanted to, explore why this happened, but also what's changed since then in terms of how we've become, in a sense, accepting. There's a big uproar for a few days whenever a shooting happens, but then everybody goes back to business as usual, So, first thing to do is find the old newspaper accounts, but also that wasn't that long ago, so there are plenty of people, still alive.
Right.
And
you've talked to a lot of family members and victims of the shooting,
I
too.
have. Yeah.
How has that process been? That's such a hard topic to discuss with someone who's been that close to it, I would imagine.
It's very hard.
And especially to dig it back up, too, after all these years.
Right. And I sometimes, that's the digging something back up is sometimes something that I kind of wrestle with, is this something that should I have some guilt about putting somebody through something again? I had this, that kind of question in my mind when I was working on Devil in the Baptist Church, Bob Gray's Unholy Trinity, about his pastor Trinity Baptist Church on the West Side, who sexually abused children for 50 years. But I think that telling stories is important. I think that when we don't tell them, then I think secrecy means things never change, and not talking about things means things never change. And it's really kind of surprising in a sense, although I guess it shouldn't be surprising to me anymore, because I've experienced this for a long time, but people like to tell their stories. We got StoryCorps here right now, right? It's a human necessity. Having said that, it's very hard to talk to somebody who's been through something like that, and I want to be as respectful as I can. I don't want to do anything even slightly stupidly insensitive, and it's really, and survivors deal with things so differently. It's one of the really kind of fascinating things, So I talked to a survivor who was not shot. He was there. And, this has been, 28 years ago, and he cried a lot. And he said, my wife told me not to talk to you because whenever I talk to somebody, it takes me weeks to get over this.
Wow.
I talked to another survivor who was shot. She was shot several times, and newspapers actually said that she was shot 13 times, right? So this is one of the first things I, obviously, thank them for talking to me and everything else. But, I say, so, newspaper said you were shot 13 times. And she starts laughing, which is not anything that I expected. And she says, actually, she was only, that's her word, only shot 7 times. But all of the bullets, except for one, passed all the way through. So she has 13 bullet holes, and she seemed to think that was kind of like a punchline.
Wow.
But the people that I've all talked to they've been gracious, and I think they appreciate being able to tell their stories, so which puts kind of a huge it's a huge responsibility because I want to treat their stories right. I don't want to get anything wrong.
Right, but they trust you with that. And I think it takes a lot of courage to even invite someone to share those kinds of tragic stories. So really, that's incredible. And you said you're turning this novella into a play too,
Yep. Yeah,
which will go on stage at FSCJ in March.
It will. Yeah.
What considerations do you take when you're turning a story from the page to the stage, I guess you could say?
Well, so 2 years ago, FSCJ DramaWorks put on. So Ken McCullough, who's directed FSCJ DramaWorks for a long time, he's kind of this, to me, this kind of unsung hero. This play in March will be his 50th production at FSCJ, and I've gone to not all, but the vast majority of the plays that DramaWorks has put on since I've been at FSCJ, and it's one thing that always makes me feel proud. I work here. This place does really good stuff. I mean, these are students, and it's really phenomenal to see it happen. So 2 years ago, Ken asked me to adapt my book, Stalking Otis Toole, a Southern Gothic, for the stage, and which is incredibly hard subject matter because depending on who you talk to, Otis Toole's either, and he grew up in Jacksonville, one of the worst serial killers in history, or he's the biggest fake. And so I find all the contradictions in the story really interesting, but obviously it's really heavy subject matter. And but it was an incredible experience, and this experience is kind of working at it from the opposite side because I first wrote this as a play, and I'm converting it into a novella. So it's kind of flipped.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
No,
that.
it's okay. And it's kind of like it's the closest thing to what you would call it would be documentary theater, sort of like most famous example of documentary theater is probably the Laramie Project.
Right.
Yeah. About Matthew Shepard, and what happened with his being murdered in Wyoming and how the community wrestled with that. So I'm using people's actual words and breaking it into, and I'm really kind of replicating the dialogue and kind of, there's some shaping of it, but their words are really powerful, and so so I'm excited about it.
We are too.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see the play.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's awesome. So we asked this at the end of all of our interviews,
Okay.
Tim. We are dying to know, when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Probably a number of things, but 2 things. When I was in 3rd grade, I will always remember writing stories and reading them to my class, and I would write, these gory little, they weren't very horrific, but horror stories. And I would get so nervous reading, I would like fall down on the floor. I can remember that.
Oh.
I'm glad you find that cute. But also, I mentioned this at the start, so full circle, an archaeologist. I mean, I've always wanted, I still, I've done a couple of field school digs with UNF when they go out to like Black Hammock Island.
Yeah.
I've always been fascinated with digging up old stuff.
Well,
So,
and now you're digging up old
Yeah.
stories. So
yeah,
you are
the combination of the two.
You're an archaeologist for sure.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much for coming on, Tim.
Thank
Yeah,
you so
thank
much.
you. This is interesting. If you want to read more of Tim Gilmore's stories, you can check him out at JaxPsychoGeo.com. Check out all of his amazing explorations of our city. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, you can really get lost on that website. And if you want to go down your own rabbit holes throughout Jacksonville, please come by. First of all, get yourself a library card because you're going to need one of those for more than what we're about to talk about. But you should come by the main library, downtown Jacksonville. It's a beautiful place if you've never been.
Yeah, you can get lost in here alone.
You can get lost in the building, and you can get lost in the information our building contains.
Yep, good one, Hurley.
Slam dunk.
I thought you were gonna say get lost in a book, but that was good too.
Well, we're
Same
more than
thing.
just books. That's what I'm
Sure.
trying to say. You
That's
could
true.
get lost in a book, or you could explore our map collection. You could explore our microfilm collection.
All of our art.
Yeah, you can read newspaper articles from like 800 years ago. Maybe longer.
Yes, and all of this is available with your Jacksonville Public Library card.
Yes, that's the one. Get it, folks. Get on it. You should follow us on social media while you're at it, at Jax Library. We're on all of the social media platforms. And please subscribe to our show.
Yes, more content coming, so make sure you get it. Subscribe.
Yes, leave us a review, rate us, do all that fun stuff. And visit us online, jaxpubliclibrary.org/podcast.
That's right.
No, just one /podcast, sorry.
Yeah.
Just jaxpubliclibrary.org/podcast. That's it.
This podcast was produced by Brian Thomas, aka BT, aka
Producer Brian.
Goodbye.
Good job, Jack.
Wow, that was fun.
Knocked it out of the park. I'm so proud of you.
Thanks, Hurley. That was fun.